In this video, I'd like to tell you about some guitar gear that I've kind of fallen out of love with. This is all gear that I might have had, owned, or even liked at some point in time, but at the time of recording this video, then I'm really not fussed about any of the gear that I'm going to mention in today's video. Before I begin the list, I'd just like to say if you're new to the channel and you want a structured guide on learning jazz guitar from the very start, then I put together a brand new video course which gives you all the information, all the things you need to know to get started learning jazz guitar. The first piece of gear that I'm not really too bothered about these days is the 335 guitar. Now, I've owned two of these over the years. I used to have a 2011 fat neck Gibson 335, which was a great guitar, to be honest with you. And I also used to have a Yamaha SA2000, which are also really nice guitars. There really wasn't much in them. The Yamaha and the Gibson, if you're looking for a 335, I don't think you can go wrong with any of those. And I did enjoy them for a while, but the thing is, I always kind of felt that for me, this is the big part in all of this, for me, they just kind of fell short when it comes to a really good jazz sound. So I did some video comparisons where I basically compared the Yamaha SA2000 to my Yamaha AE1200, which is kind of in between a 175 and an L5 in terms of spec. And I always thought that hollow bodies generally sound much fatter, much warmer than 335s and have a much better jazz sound. Despite that, I did keep the 335s for a while and I enjoyed playing them. And then I discovered 330s. So for me, 330 does everything a 335 can when it comes to getting a jazz sound, but it just does it better. The sound is darker, it's more resonant, the 330s are always lighter. I like the longer tail pieces, which unless you're going for a certain time period on vintage Gibson 335s, you don't get. For me, the 330 was basically everything that I wanted from a 335 from a jazz tone perspective, which really, that's my personal spin. I would think that if you want kind of a general semi-hollow body guitar for all kinds of music, then the 335 is probably the most versatile guitar that you can get. So for me, that's what you've got to remember with all of this. But saying that, I kind of like a lot of the old vintage kind of blues guitar tones, like the old kind of Freddie King sounds and stuff, Freddie King's earlier records. And those P90s really kind of capture that vibe more than what a 335 does. The other thing, I guess this is kind of like a 330 as well, but with 335s, they are generally a bit faffier to work on because if you kind of mess around with the tone or the volume pots, you've got to, kind of go in the F hole, and then they're a little bit trickier to work on. So if you want to change pickups or things like that, then they tend to be a little bit more faffy. So at the time of recording this, the 335s, they just kind of don't really intrigue me that much. At least, I wouldn't really want them. I might be open to one in the future, but really I don't want to have I don't really want to have it as a main guitar. It's really something that I'm not actively seeking. Generally not interested in 335s no longer. The second type of guitar on this list is a Strat. Any kind of Stratocaster really doesn't intrigue me that much. So I'll never forget even when I first started playing the guitar, a family member said to me, "Why would you ever want one of those? They just look like those cheap beginner guitars." And I kind of agree. Whenever you see kind of the cheap guitars, they're always kind of Strat copies and they're so generic and they're used so much and they've got such kind of a pop culture kind of iconic thing that as soon as you pick up a Strat and start playing them, they have certain sounds that are kind of, associated with really famous players that are hard to find your own voice on. So for me, I just don't have any interest ever really in owning another Strat. And of course I do have one Strat at the time of this recording, but that guitar is kind of, sentimentally important to me. It was my kind of first good electric guitar, and for that reason I kind of hang on to it. But you're certainly never going to find me buying another Strat on this channel when I can buy a Telecaster or a Jaguar or a Jazzmaster or a semi-hollow 330 or an archtop. Then I just don't see the point of kind of parting money with Strats. I don't know where it is. I mean, the Strat that I got sounds okay. The neck pickup, for me sounds, say, more pleasing than certain other types of guitars, but it just sounds thin. The bridge pickup, no matter what kind of pickups you get in a Strat, the bridge pickup always sounds weak and thin. and you know, the quacky sounds, you know, positions 2 and 4, thin, you know, picky. I don't know, you know, and obviously, you know, people like Matt Knopfler and players like that have got some great sounds with them, but they're just so kind of thin and weedy sounding. And while the neck pickup sounds good for a jazz sound, I always think that a Telecaster just has that extra kind of element of thickness, warmthness, and depth that no matter what strat neck pickup I put in, it can never really get near a Telecaster pickup. So for me, you know, I'm one of those that say Leo got it right the first time, and I prefer the Tellies to the Strats. Moving away from guitars, the next item on this list is using delay when it comes to a jazz sound. And to make this very clear, I'm not against anybody using delay. I think there are several examples of great players who can use kind of effects for jazz and stuff. And certainly at one time, around 10 years ago, I used to like that sound. I was listening to kind of some of the more current jazz guitar players, people like Jonathan Kreisberg, Kurt Rosenwinkel, and I like the sound they get when they had delay on their tone. And for a while, I was kind of really liking it and really enjoying it. But recently, I just think that whenever I pick up an electric guitar and I get a good, clean sound, just a little bit of reverb, so much of it comes from your fingers. And I always kind of think that the more that you're putting on that, and of course this is very much my perspective, it's, you know, the more you put on that kind of sound detracts from what's kind of, you know, in your fingers and what you can bring out of the instrument. At least that's how I feel when I play. You know, I always feel like if I give myself a really kind of dry sound, if I have a good telly or a good arch top, then so much of it is up to me to kind of bring out. And of course, you know, that has its pros and cons. You know, there's sometimes if you've got an off day, playing through an amp which doesn't have much reverb and playing through a very transparent guitar like a Telecaster, it can make you sound like an amateur. But when you get it right, you feel like you know, you really kind of onto something with that. So for me, using delay as it for a jazz sound, there's many people that get amazing sounds and I'm all for it. But for me, I'm still kind of exploring so much about what I can get from my fingers in regards to the sound. And of course, you know, just the volume and the tone on the guitar and the amp. And yeah, I just don't really have the itch to kind of use anything like delay or excessive reverb or chorus, even though there's plenty of people that get great sounds from that. For me, it's just kind of not something that I'm drawn to. The next thing that I like to talk about on this list is using heavy strings on solid body guitars, specifically Fender guitars. And this is one where some of my favorite players, like someone like Ted Green or something like that, is known for using heavy strings on a solid body guitar. Of course, Ted Green liked to tune down, and obviously Ted Green's sound is is way better than mine, isn't it? I have no problem saying that Ted Green is 10 times or 1,000 times the jazz guitar player that I'd ever aspire to be. But for me, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because I've grown up playing Fenders and things with lighter strings on. They always just feel so stiff. If I've got a Telecaster that's got 11s or 12s, it feels sluggish for me to use them. And having 10s on, it just feels so comfortable for me to play and so fast. And of course, there is definitely a difference in sound. I've done a few recordings and you can definitely tell that using heavier strings gives you a different sound. But there is kind of certain articulations that come from using lighter strings that heavier strings don't have on solid bodies, I found too. So, you know, that's obviously very subjective and it's kind of how I feel about it. But at the time of recording this, I think I have 11s on my Strat. And that's just because of the tremolo system, really. On Telecasters, 10s are where it's at for me, really. I really like using 10s. So for me, using heavy strings on solid body guitars is just not something. I've tried it, been there. Even flat wound strings, I'm not a fan of flat wound strings on solid body guitars. I like heavy strings and I like flat wound strings on archtop guitars, maybe even kind of some semi hollow body guitars. But for me, give me 10s, maybe even 11s on a solid body all day long and I'll be happy. The last item on this list is, I think, probably the least subjective, and I think that most of you will probably agree with this. This is more of a sign of the times than anything, and that is using big amplifiers. So the current biggest amp that I have at the time of recording this video is a single 12-inch Polytone Mega Brute, which sounds great. I love that amp. Perhaps most guitar players would probably consider that a small or medium amp anyway. You can't really consider that a big amp, can you? But certainly in my younger days, I would use things like amps that had two 10-inch speakers, two 12-inch speakers, and they do sound good. You know, I can't deny that. One of my favorite sounds that I used to use was, I think it was a deluxe reverb or a twin reverb, and it sounded great, especially when you're playing with a full band. It gives you such a big sound. So they definitely have their place, but for me, you know, doing a little bit of playing now and mostly teaching and playing kind of locally and stuff, and especially playing in smaller groups, which is what I tend to do mostly. It's very rare that I play in bigger bands with kind of drummers and, you know, several horn players and stuff. I just simply have no need for them. And once you get used to the sound of a smaller amp, once you get used to the lightness of it, you know, the smaller amps have their pros as well. They're much easier to mic up and, you know, much easier to use around the house. And obviously, if you are playing it in quiet situations like I often am, then you can kind of turn it up a little bit more and kind of, you know, bring out more of the amp. And it's like when I used to have Music Man amps, which I do like the sound of those. Even then, those were like single 10, single 12-inch speaker amps, and I get the volume to 2 most of the time. And if I were taking it out playing free, you know, so I just really didn't feel like I was pushing the amps that much. Like, kind of what you almost need to do sometimes when you're playing the bigger amps is kind of, you know, turn them up a little bit so that they, you know, project and do what they're meant to do. So that's the last piece of gear that I'm no longer in love with. But what I would really like to know is, what piece of guitar related gear are you not into? What piece of gear would you maybe have loved 10 years ago that now just doesn't interest you at all? So if you like this video, you found it useful, you found it entertaining, then please give the video a like, please subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you in the next video.